The sun poured into the modest apartment Sarah called home, its warmth doing little to lift her spirits. The day began like any other. Michael woke early to head to his job as a mechanic, leaving Sarah to care for their 2 young children. The clattering of pots and pans in the tiny kitchen was accompanied by the chatter of the radio, playing the same tunes it had for years. Sarah sighed as she folded the laundry. Her life was predictable, her marriage dull. Michael was a good man, hard-working and reliable, but he seemed oblivious to the monotony that had consumed their relationship. Conversations were brief, affection rare. Her dreams of romance and excitement felt like distant memories, buried under the weight of bills and responsibilities. That evening, as Michael returned home, his face smeared with grease and exhaustion, Sarah wondered if this was all her life would ever be. Sarah's friend Tola had invited her to a birthday party, insisting she needed a break. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet flattering dress, hoping to remind herself of the woman she used to be before marriage and motherhood consumed her identity. The party was lively, filled with laughter, music, and strangers. As Sarah sipped her drink, a man approached her. "I'm David," he said, his smile warm and confident. His eyes held hers longer than she expected. They talked, and Sarah found herself laughing more in those few hours than she had in months. David was charming, telling tales of his successful business ventures and luxurious lifestyle. For the first time in years, Sarah felt noticed, admired. When the party ended, David gave her his card, his fingers brushing hers as he said, "Call me." The card lay on Sarah's bedside table, a small but persistent reminder of the man who had made her feel alive. Days turned into weeks, and she found herself thinking about David more often than she should. Her conversations with Michael grew shorter, her frustrations deeper. One afternoon, when the children were napping, Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the number. David's voice was smooth and inviting. They arranged to meet for coffee. Sarah told herself it was harmless, just 2 adults having a conversation. Their meeting felt like a scene from a romantic movie. David was attentive, his compliments intoxicating. He spoke of a life Sarah could only dream of, a life she felt she deserved. For the first time in years, she saw a glimpse of a future beyond her mundane reality. Sarah's meetings with David became frequent. She told Michael she was visiting friends or running errands, the lies slipping easily from her lips. Each encounter with David pulled her deeper into his world of promises and allure. One evening, David confessed his feelings. "I can give you so much more than this," he said, gesturing vaguely, as if to dismiss her current life. "You deserve to be happy, Sarah." His words echoed in her mind long after she returned home. Michael, as usual, was engrossed in the television, oblivious to the storm brewing in Sarah's heart. She looked at him and felt an overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction. That night, as she lay awake, she made a decision that would change everything. The morning light brought clarity. Sarah packed a small suitcase, her hands trembling. She wrote a letter to Michael, explaining that she needed to find herself, to chase a happiness she had long forgotten. She kissed her children goodbye as they slept, her tears soaking their pillows. David was waiting for her, his car gleaming in the sunlight. As they drove away, Sarah's heart was a mix of fear and exhilaration. She glanced at her wedding ring, then slid it off, placing it in her bag. "You won't regret this," David said, his hand resting on hers. Sarah nodded, convincing herself that she was making the right choice. The life she had left behind faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by dreams of luxury and love. The first few weeks with David felt like a dream. He took Sarah to fancy restaurants and introduced her to friends who spoke of yachts and vacations abroad. For the first time in years, Sarah felt glamorous, like she was finally living the life she deserved. But beneath the surface, small cracks began to show. David's phone buzzed constantly, and he was often evasive about his business dealings. When Sarah asked questions, he brushed them off with charming smiles and vague answers. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," he would say. "I've got everything under control." But Sarah couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Bills piled up on the small dining table in their cramped apartment, a far cry from the luxury David had promised. She noticed he avoided certain phone calls and seemed to be juggling more than he let on. One afternoon, Sarah decided to tidy up while David was out. As she sorted through a drawer, she found a stack of unopened letters. Her hands trembled as she read them. Overdue notices, eviction warnings, and unpaid debts. The lavish life David had painted for her was nothing more than a mirage. When David returned, Sarah confronted him. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up the letters. His confident demeanor faltered, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. I was going to handle it," he stammered. "Business has been slow, but things will pick up. You have to trust me." But Sarah wasn't convinced. The man she had left everything for was not who he claimed to be, and the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. Determined to salvage her new life, Sarah decided to support David in any way she could. She began searching for a job, something she hadn't done since before her marriage to Michael. The bustling streets of Lagos offered opportunities, but not without challenges. After weeks of searching, Sarah landed a position as a receptionist at a small travel agency. The pay was modest, but it was a start. She hoped her contribution would ease their financial strain and restore some stability. David, however, seemed increasingly distant. Nights that were once filled with whispered promises and laughter were now silent. Sarah's efforts to connect with him were met with frustration and excuses. The man who had swept her off her feet was slipping away. One evening, after another tense argument with David, Sarah sat alone at the dining table. She reached for her phone and found herself scrolling through old photos of Michael and the children. Tears blurred her vision as she realized how much she missed them. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, a man in a suit handed her an envelope. "This is for Mr. David," he said before walking away. Curiosity got the better of her, and Sarah opened the letter. It was a legal notice, threatening legal action for unpaid loans. The reality of David's situation was worse than she had imagined. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Her thoughts raced as she replayed the choices that had led her to this moment. The love she thought she had found in David now felt like a cruel trick, and the stability she had abandoned seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. She thought of Michael, his steady presence, and the children's innocent laughter. Her heart ached for them, but shame held her back. How could she return after everything she had done? How could she face the family she had left behind? As dawn broke, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way to fix the mess she had made, even if it meant confronting her past and facing the pain she had caused. Sarah's decision to face her past was daunting, but she knew it was the only way to reclaim her life. Her first step was writing a letter to Michael. The words didn't come easily as she poured out her heart, apologizing for her choices and acknowledging the pain she had caused. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote, "but I need you to know that leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. I miss you and the kids more than I can say." With trembling hands, she sealed the envelope and placed it in her bag. Delivering it would be another hurdle, but at least the words were on paper. The day Sarah decided to deliver the letter, the city's chaos seemed to mirror her emotions. The streets were alive with the sounds of honking cars and shouting vendors, but Sarah felt detached from it all. She made her way to the modest apartment she had once shared with Michael and the children. From a distance, she saw her daughter, Ada, playing with her little brother in the courtyard. Their laughter was a bittersweet melody that brought tears to her eyes. Sarah wanted to run to them, to hold them, but fear held her back. She slipped the letter into the mailbox and hurried away before anyone could see her. Back at the apartment she shared with David, Sarah's anxiety was palpable. She had taken the first step, but the weight of uncertainty loomed over her. That evening, David returned home visibly agitated. His shirt was rumpled, and the carefree smile he usually wore was replaced with a scowl. "What's going on?" Sarah asked cautiously. David slammed a folder onto the table. "They're threatening to take everything," he said. "The debts, they're worse than I told you." Sarah's frustration boiled over. "You lied to me, David. You promised me a life that doesn't exist. David's anger turned to desperation. I can fix this, Sarah. I just need more time. But Sarah's patience had run out. Time isn't going to change the truth, she said, her voice firm. I can't keep living like this. Days passed, and Sarah anxiously waited for a response to her letter. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart raced. Finally, an unfamiliar number called. She hesitated before answering, her voice shaky. Hello, Sarah. Michael's voice was steady but distant. I got your letter. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Michael, she began, but he cut her off. I'm not ready to talk about everything, he said. But the kids, they miss you. Maybe you could come by and see them. Relief and fear collided in Sarah's chest. I'd like that, she whispered. The day Sarah visited her old home, her nerves were frayed. Michael opened the door, his expression unreadable. The children's excitement at seeing her was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. They clung to her, bombarding her with questions and stories about everything she had missed. Michael watched from a distance, his arms crossed. Sarah approached him cautiously. Thank you for letting me see them, she said softly. He nodded. They deserved to have their mother around. As Sarah spent the afternoon with her children, a glimmer of hope sparked within her. Rebuilding what she had broken would be difficult, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose. Sarah couldn't shake the image of Michael's distant gaze as she left their apartment that evening. His kindness in letting her see the children had been unexpected, but the wall between them was unmistakable. As she walked back to her small apartment with David, the weight of her decisions pressed down on her like a heavy cloud. David was nowhere to be found when she returned. The emptiness of the space mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. Sitting at the edge of the bed, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through pictures of happier times with her family. The laughter in those moments seemed like a distant dream. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was determined to make amends. The next morning, Sarah's quiet resolve was shattered when David burst through the door, his face pale and his clothes disheveled. Sarah, I need you to pack, he said urgently. Pack? What are you talking about? She asked, alarmed. We need to leave, he said, avoiding her eyes. The landlord is threatening to evict us. I couldn't pay the rent this month. Sarah stared at him, disbelief mingled with anger. You promised me, David. You said you'd fix this. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I thought I could. I'm sorry, Sarah. I've let you down. As much as she wanted to lash out, Sarah realized anger wouldn't solve anything. She began gathering their belongings, her mind racing with thoughts of where they could go. Desperation drove Sarah to do what she never thought she could. She called Michael. Her voice trembled as she explained the situation, careful not to divulge too much about David's failings. We have nowhere else to go, she admitted. I know I don't deserve it, but could you help us? Just for a little while. Michael's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he sighed. Bring your things. You can stay in the guest room. But this doesn't mean anything has changed between us. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as relief and shame washed over her. Thank you, she whispered. Returning to her old home felt surreal. The children greeted her with uncontainable joy, but Sarah couldn't help noticing the tension in Michael's posture as he showed her to the guest room. It was clear he had made this decision for the children, not for her. David, uncharacteristically quiet, carried their few belongings inside. The man who had once been so full of confidence now seemed small and defeated. That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words. Sarah longed to reach out to Michael, to tell him how much she appreciated his kindness, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into helping around the house. She cooked meals, cleaned, and spent every spare moment with the children. Their laughter began to return, a sound that warmed her heart and gave her hope. Michael, however, remained guarded. He acknowledged her efforts with curt nods, but kept his interactions with her brief. Sarah knew she had a long way to go to earn his trust, But she clung to the small victories, a smile from Ada, a shared joke with her son, as signs that healing was possible. One evening, as she tucked the children into bed, Michael appeared in the doorway. "You're doing well with them," he said quietly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild what she had lost. The days turned into weeks, and while Sarah remained grateful to be under Michael's roof, the tension between them never fully dissipated. She and David shared the small guest room, a stark reminder of how far they had fallen. David kept to himself, avoiding Michael and the children entirely. It was as though he had given up completely, leaving Sarah to navigate the emotional minefield alone. Sarah worked tirelessly to prove her worth. She prepared the children for school, tidied up the house, and cooked meals, always hoping for a word of encouragement from Michael. But he stayed distant, his interactions with her polite but detached. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Sarah broke the silence. "Michael, I know it's not enough, but I want to thank you for everything. For the children, for giving us a place to stay." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do this for you, Sarah. I did it for them." Her chest tightened, but she nodded. "I understand." David's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours, sometimes days, without explanation. When he was home, he avoided eye contact and spoke in curt sentences. It was clear to Sarah that the man she had once thought of as her escape had become a shadow of himself. One morning, she woke to find a note on the bedside table. The handwriting was hurried and uneven. "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry for everything. You'll be better off without me. David." Tears blurred her vision as she read the note. Part of her felt relief. Another part felt the sting of abandonment. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, unsure how to process the loss. When Michael noticed David's absence, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sarah braced herself for his judgment, but it never came. Instead, he focused on the children, ensuring their routines remained uninterrupted. Sarah's days became a rhythm of care and quiet reflection. With David gone, she no longer had to tiptoe around his moods. Her focus shifted entirely to the children and repairing her relationship with Michael. One afternoon, as she helped Ada with her homework, the little girl looked up and asked, "Mommy, are you staying forever?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She hesitated, then smiled gently. "I hope so, sweetheart. I want to be here for you and your brother." Ada beamed, her trust in her mother's words shining in her eyes. Sarah's heart swelled with determination. She would do everything in her power to make that hope a reality. One evening, as the children slept, Sarah found Michael sitting alone on the porch, a cup of tea in his hands. She hesitated before stepping outside, the cool night air wrapping around her like a shroud. "Mind if I join you?" she asked softly. He shrugged but didn't object. Sarah sat down, the silence between them stretching uncomfortably. Finally, she spoke. "I know I hurt you, Michael. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I regret everything. Leaving you, the children. It was the worst decision I've ever made." Michael's jaw tightened. "Regret doesn't change what happened, Sarah. The kids cried themselves to sleep for weeks. I had to be both mother and father because you chose to chase a fantasy." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she didn't interrupt. She let him speak, absorbing the full weight of his pain. "I know," she whispered when he finished, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Michael didn't respond, but the tension in his shoulders eased ever so slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to see subtle changes in her life. The children's laughter became more frequent, their hugs more spontaneous. Michael remained guarded, but less cold. He started leaving notes on the kitchen counter, reminders about school schedules or grocery lists, small gestures that felt monumental to Sarah. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Ada asked, "Daddy, can Mommy come to my school play next week?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "If she wants to," he said. Sarah's heart soared. "I'd love to," she said, smiling at Ada. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile but growing belief that her family could find a way to heal. Sarah prepared for Ada's school play with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The children's warmth had been a balm for her wounded heart, but Michael's guarded demeanor reminded her that their road to reconciliation was far from over. She dressed carefully that evening, choosing an outfit that was modest but thoughtful, a silent gesture of respect for the family she was trying to rebuild. When they arrived at the school, Ada's face lit up with joy. "Mommy, Daddy, sit in the front," she insisted, pulling them toward the best seats in the hall. Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance but complied, sitting side by side as they waited for the performance to begin. As the children's voices filled the room, Sarah felt a swell of pride watching Ada on stage. She caught Michael's faint smile as he clapped enthusiastically, and for a brief moment, it felt like old times. When the play ended, Ada ran to them, throwing her arms around both her parents. Sarah's heart ached with the bittersweet joy of the moment. The following week, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to Sarah. She opened it cautiously, her heart pounding. Inside was a brief message from David. "Sarah, I'm starting over and wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. David." Sarah folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure how to feel. David's departure had left a scar, but she had already begun the process of healing. She resolved to focus on the present and the people who mattered most. That evening, she shared the news with Michael. "David wrote to me," she said hesitantly. "He's moving on." Michael's expression didn't change, but he nodded. "Good. It's time we all did." In the weeks that followed, Michael began to soften. He invited Sarah to join him on errands and even asked her opinion on small household matters. These moments were small, almost imperceptible, but to Sarah, they felt monumental. She cherished each one, careful not to overstep or rush the fragile progress they were making. One afternoon, as they stood in the kitchen preparing dinner together, Michael spoke up. "The kids seem happier with you around," he said, his tone neutral but sincere. "I'm glad," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "They're my everything." Michael looked at her for a moment before nodding. It wasn't an apology or a declaration of forgiveness, but it was a step toward understanding. One Saturday, Michael suggested a family outing to the beach. The children were ecstatic, and Sarah could hardly believe the invitation. As they packed a picnic and loaded the car, the atmosphere felt lighter than it had in months. At the beach, they built sandcastles, chased waves, and shared laughter that seemed to come effortlessly. Sarah watched as Michael lifted Ada onto his shoulders, her giggles echoing in the salty air. It was a glimpse of the family they used to be, and she vowed to do everything in her power to protect it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael turned to Sarah. "Thank you for today," he said simply. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "Thank you for giving me the chance." The outing marked a turning point. While Michael still maintained a level of distance, he no longer avoided conversations with Sarah. They began to share more moments of laughter and camaraderie, especially in the presence of the children. One evening, as they sat in the living room after putting the kids to bed, Michael asked, "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of what he meant. "I think about it all the time, but I know I can't plan for anything until I've earned back your trust." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's time we start figuring it out together." For the first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of hope that their love, wounded but not broken, might find a way to bloom again. The glimmer of hope that had begun to emerge between Sarah and Michael was fragile. Though they spoke more openly, a cloud of unspoken fears hung over their conversations. One evening, as Sarah washed the dishes, she noticed Michael standing in the doorway, his expression conflicted. "Sarah," he began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about everything." She turned off the faucet and faced him, her heart racing. "What is it, Michael?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she remembered from their early days. "It's hard to move forward when I keep wondering if you'll leave again. How do I know this isn't temporary?" His words stung, but Sarah understood. She stepped closer, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I can't erase what I did, but I'm here now. Every choice I make is for you and the kids. I hope someday you'll believe that." Michael nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I'm trying, Sarah."
For them.
As the days passed, Sarah's resolve was tested. Michael's moments of warmth were often followed by stretches of cold distance. She threw herself into caring for the children, finding solace in their laughter and trust. One afternoon, while helping Ada with a school project, the little girl asked, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy smile at you like he used to?" Sarah's throat tightened. She forced a smile and said, "Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out. But we both love you and your brother very much." Ada seemed satisfied with the answer, but the question lingered in Sarah's mind. She couldn't deny the strain between her and Michael, but she clung to the hope that time and effort would heal their wounds. One evening, as Sarah sorted through old photo albums, Michael walked into the room. He paused when he saw her, his gaze falling on a picture of their wedding day. "You kept those?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. "Of course," Sarah replied softly. "They remind me of what we could have again." Michael sat down beside her, studying the photos. For a moment, the tension between them eased as they shared memories of happier times. When he pointed out a particularly funny moment from their honeymoon, Sarah laughed, the sound light and genuine. It was a small moment, but it felt like progress. One morning, as Sarah tidied the living room, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find an old friend, Clara, standing on the porch. Clara had been one of Sarah's confidants during her time with David, but had distanced herself when Sarah's life began to unravel. "Clara," Sarah said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you were back," Clara replied, her tone tentative. "I wanted to see how you're doing." Inviting her inside, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. As they talked, Clara's questions turned pointed. "Do you think Michael will ever really forgive you?" Sarah's smile faltered. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Clara's visit stirred doubts that Sarah had been trying to suppress, but it also strengthened her resolve to rebuild her family. That evening, Michael found Sarah sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Clara came by today," Sarah said without turning around. "She asked if you'd ever forgive me." Michael sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "And what did you tell her?" "That I don't know," Sarah replied, finally meeting his gaze. "But I hope so." Michael leaned back, his eyes searching hers. "Forgiveness isn't easy, Sarah. But I'm starting to see how much you're trying. Maybe that's a start." Her breath caught, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that their family's broken pieces might one day fit together again. The days following Michael's tentative admission were filled with a cautious optimism. Sarah decided to take things slowly, knowing that rebuilding trust required patience and consistent effort. She began to include Michael in her plans more intentionally, inviting his input and seeking his opinion on family matters. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Sarah asked, "Michael, would you like to help me with a kids' school fundraiser? They need volunteers for the weekend." Michael looked at her, a bit surprised. "You want me to help?" "Of course," Sarah said. "The kids would love to see us working together." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded.
All right.
"Let's do it." The fundraiser turned out to be a success. Working side by side, Sarah and Michael found themselves laughing over small mishaps and sharing proud smiles as Ada and Junior participated in the games. It was the most natural they'd felt around each other in months. Despite the progress at home, Sarah struggled with the judgmental stares and whispers of her neighbors. Some people still viewed her as the woman who had abandoned her family, and their disapproval was palpable. One afternoon, while walking to the market, Sarah ran into Mrs. Adebayo, an older woman known for her blunt nature. "Sarah," she said, her tone sharp, "it's good to see you back where you belong. But tell me, how do you plan to undo the hurt you've caused?" Sarah took a deep breath, refusing to let the words sting. "By being here every day and doing everything I can for my family." That's all I can do. Mrs. Adebayo's expression softened slightly. Good. Then keep at it. Actions speak louder than words. The encounter left Sarah more determined than ever to prove her commitment not just to her family, but to herself. One evening, as they sat in the living room after putting the children to bed, Michael handed Sarah a cup of tea. "Thanks for today," he said, his voice warm. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For making me laugh again," he replied. "I didn't realize how much I missed it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, smiling. "I've missed it too." The moment felt like a breakthrough, a small yet significant crack in the wall that had grown between them. For the first time, Sarah felt like they were truly moving forward together. One weekend, as the family was enjoying a quiet afternoon at home, a knock at the door disrupted the peace. Michael opened it to find David standing on the porch, looking disheveled and remorseful. "What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his tone icy. David hesitated, his gaze shifting to Sarah, who had come to the door. "I just wanted to apologize. To both of you." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. David continued, "I know I caused a lot of pain. I needed to say I'm sorry." Sarah's heart pounded as she glanced at Michael, unsure of what to do. Finally, Michael spoke. "We don't need your apology, David. What we need is to move on." David nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I understand. I won't bother you again." As he walked away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: relief, closure, and a renewed determination to focus on her family. After David's visit, Michael seemed more at ease. It was as if a weight had been lifted, allowing him to see Sarah's efforts more clearly. He began to initiate conversations and even suggested a family outing to the zoo, something they hadn't done in years. During the outing, Sarah watched as Michael carried Junior on his shoulders and pointed out animals to Ada. The sight filled her with hope. Later, as they shared ice cream on a park bench, Michael turned to Sarah and said, "I think we're going to be okay." Sarah's breath caught. "You really think so?" He nodded, his expression soft. "It won't be easy, but I'm willing to try if you are." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Sarah woke up feeling lighter than she had in months. For the first time, the weight of regret felt manageable, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. She turned to see Michael already up, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in hand. "Good morning," she said softly. He glanced at her and smiled. "Morning. I was just thinking about how far we've come." Sarah sat up, her heart swelling. "I think we're finally starting to find our way back to each other." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about the kids too. They deserve to see us happy." Later that day, the family gathered in the kitchen to bake cookies. Ada and Junior argued over decorations, their laughter filling the room. Sarah and Michael shared a look across the table, a silent acknowledgement of the progress they'd made. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Michael began making plans for the future. They discussed their finances, the children's education, and even revisited old dreams they had put aside. One evening, Michael surprised Sarah by pulling out a dusty notebook from their early days of marriage. "Remember this?" he asked, opening it to reveal a list of goals they had written together. Sarah laughed, the sound light and free. "I can't believe you still have it." "Some of these dreams are still worth chasing," Michael said. "What do you think about starting over, together?" Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "I think it's the best idea you've ever had." Despite the progress, challenges arose. Michael's job became more demanding, and Sarah sometimes felt the weight of balancing the children's needs with her own aspirations. Yet, they found strength in each other. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sarah confided in Michael. "I'm scared sometimes." "Scared that I'll mess up again?" Michael took her hands in his. "We're in this together. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. We'll face whatever comes our way." His reassurance bolstered her, reminding her of how far they had come as a team. One Sunday, during a church service, the pastor spoke about the power of forgiveness. Michael's gaze met Sarah's as the words resonated deeply with both of them. After the service, Michael turned to her and said, "I think I'm finally ready to let go of the anger. For good." Sarah's breath hitched. "You mean that?" "I do," he said, his voice steady. "We've both made mistakes, but holding on to the pain won't help us move forward." In that moment, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Michael's words were more than a promise. They were a testament to their journey and the strength of their renewed bond. The garden became a metaphor for their renewed life together. Every week, Sarah, Michael, Ada, and Junior tended to it, pulling out weeds and planting new seeds. It wasn't just about the plants, it was about nurturing their bond and creating something beautiful as a family. One evening, as the sun set, Michael called everyone to the backyard. "I have something to share," he said, holding a small box in his hand. Sarah's brow furrowed in curiosity. "What is it?" Michael opened the box to reveal a delicate gold bracelet with small charms.
"This is for you, Sarah."
Each charm represents something we've been through: a flower for our new beginning, a heart for love, and an anchor for strength. "I wanted to remind you that no matter what, we're in this together." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the bracelet. Tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." The kids cheered as Sarah hugged Michael, their laughter filling the evening air. It was a moment of pure joy, one that would stay with them forever. With their relationship back on track, Sarah began revisiting her old passions. She had always loved cooking and had dreamed of opening a small catering business. One morning, over breakfast, she shared her idea with Michael. "I want to start small," she explained. "Maybe cater for a few events and see where it goes." Michael smiled, his pride evident. "I think it's a wonderful idea. You've always had a gift in the kitchen. Let's make it happen." Together, they worked on a plan. Michael helped with budgeting, and the kids pitched in by designing a simple logo. Sarah's first event, a birthday party for a neighbor, was a huge success. It marked the beginning of a new chapter not just for her, but for the entire family. Word of Sarah's catering business spread quickly. Soon, she was getting calls from all over the neighborhood. With each event, her confidence grew. Michael and the children supported her every step of the way, whether it was by delivering food or cheering her on. One day, Mrs. Adebayo stopped by. "Sarah, I heard about your business," she said. "I need someone to cater my granddaughter's wedding. Can I count on you?" Sarah's eyes widened. "A wedding? That's a big responsibility. If anyone can handle it, it's you," Mrs. Adebayo replied firmly. Encouraged by the vote of confidence, Sarah accepted the challenge. The wedding turned out to be a triumph, earning Sarah praise and solidifying her reputation in the community. Late one night, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah and Michael sat on the porch. The stars were bright, and the air was cool. Michael held Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "There were times I wasn't sure we'd make it." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me neither. But I'm glad we fought for this. For us. For our family." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared journeys settling over them. The struggles they had faced made their happiness even sweeter. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. The house buzzed with energy as the family prepared for a celebration. It was Sarah's birthday, and Michael had organized a surprise party. Friends and neighbors filled the backyard, the air alive with laughter and music. When Sarah stepped outside, she was overwhelmed by the sight. A banner reading "Happy Birthday, Sarah" hung across the garden. Michael stood with the kids, holding a cake. "Surprise!" everyone shouted. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she looked around. The people she loved most surrounded her, their faces glowing with happiness. As the evening went on, Sarah found herself reflecting on the twists and turns her life had taken. She realized that, despite everything, she was exactly where she needed to be. Michael raised a glass for a toast.
"To Sarah," he said.
"The heart of our family, and the strongest person I know. Here's to a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities." As glasses clinked and cheers rang out, Sarah smiled, her heart full. The illusions of love that had once led her astray had been replaced by something real, something enduring. Her story was far from over, but she knew the best was yet to come.